Hello healers! Today I'm going to go over the long-awaited Void Gauntlet from New World PTR servers. In this video, I'll show you all the skills and passives available on this weapon. And after playing around with it on the test servers, I can confidently say that this weapon is super fun for both solo and group content, especially as a healer secondary. Please remember, as a disclaimer, this is all information based off of PTR, which is subject to change, so some skills might be different when this weapon goes live. I'm also testing this weapon as a healer with 300 focus and 150 constitution, as close to possible as what I would regularly be running. So the healing you'll see soon is based off of that high focus amount, and it would be lower if you were running this with intelligence as a DPS weapon. Also, catch me live on Twitch. I'll be trying out Void Gauntlet and the other new changes live. Links in the description. And with that, Void Gauntlet uses long-range, light and heavy attacks with skills that vary in different ranges. The right click for Void Gauntlet grants players Harvest Essence, which saps health to give rapid mana recovery, allowing players to keep up with mana-intensive skills. And the first skill in the Annihilation branch of the weapon, which seems to be more centered around DPS, crit, and CC, is Petrifying Scream. This skill unleashes a void-infused scream, dealing 100% weapon damage, as well as staggering and inflicting a root to enemies within a 5-meter cone in front of you. The root from this skill lasts for 2 seconds. The first passive for this skill, Bone Chilling Voice, increases root duration by a second for targets under half health. And the second passive, Fortifying Echoes, allows you to gain Fortify for each enemy hit, increasing damage absorption by 10% for 10 seconds per hit, stacking up to 3 times. While this skill doesn't have a huge hitbox, the CC root on this skill is awesome for kiting in both PvE and PvP. The added addition of Fortify allows you to be even more tanky as you kite, which is an added bonus as well. Just note, the frontal range isn't very far when using this, so make sure the enemy you're hitting is closer to ensure it hits. Void Blade is the next skill in the tree, and this does some massive damage. With it, you can summon a blade from your gauntlet that temporarily turns your basic attacks into melee attacks. Light attacks will do rapid damage worth 100% of weapon damage, and heavy attacks will result in a forward thrust that deals 150% of weapon damage. Both attacks can stack a debuff called Disintegrate that deals 5% of weapon damage per second while reducing damage absorption by 5% for 8 seconds, and this debuff can stack up to 3 times. This buff stays active for 15 seconds, so it's a pretty long-lasting skill. The passives for this skill are Fortified Blade, which gives you 20% Fortify when first using the skill for 5 seconds. Vicious Void, which gives 10% critical damage on Void Blade attacks, and also Leeching Blade, which gives you a self-heal on thrust attacks for 5% of weapon damage per stacks of Disintegrate on the target, so basically a max of 15% healing. And this is a good time to note, every heal on Void Gauntlet scales off of your focus exclusively, so these skills are even more juicy and potent for my fellow healer mains out there. Void Blade, even with 0 intelligence and stacking 300 focus, still packs a huge punch and is an excellent skill for both solo and group damage. The Disintegrate buff the skill gives is pretty devastating, and the thrust attack on heavy attacks gives you the ability to cover ground quickly if your target is moving. This skill does go away if you weapon swap, so keep that in mind. Oblivion is the last skill in the Annihilation tree, and it allows you to summon a huge AoE rift under your feet for 6 seconds that deals 30% of weapon damage per second to enemies, while granting yourself and your friendlies Empower, increasing their damage by 20%. The passives for this skill are Withering Oblivion, which makes it so your attacks inflict the debuff Weaken to targets inside the AoE radius, reducing their damage by 5% for 5 seconds per hit, stacking up to 3 times. And also Invigorating Oblivion, which increases plus 15 stamina per second for self and friendlies inside the AoE radius. This skill is placed directly under where you're standing, so you need to be within range of enemies and allies for maximum effectiveness. The radius on this is rather large though, so it isn't hard to catch people in it either. I like that this skill both buffs and debuffs simultaneously, which makes it an excellent all-around support skill. Next, we'll move into the Decay tree, which has a couple more healing-centered skills along with debuffs. The first skill in this tree is Baleful Tether, which fires a projectile which tethers you to an enemy for 10 seconds, weakening it and empowering you by 4% per second with a 20% maximum. If the target moves beyond 15 meters, the tether snaps. The first passive for this skill, Tethered Refresh, allows successful hits against the tethered target to reduce other Void Gauntlet cooldowns by 5%. Tethered Focus gives you a 100% mana regen while tethered, and Soul Eater regains 80% of weapon damage as health if the tethered target dies. This skill is a bit finicky with its hitbox from what I've tried so far, but the mana regeneration and buffs/debuffs it offers are pretty great. And the last passive is really only worth it if you're using Void Gauntlet as a healer, as the heal doesn't do much without focus. The next skill is Orb of Decay, which fires an unblockable orb that passes through enemies, dealing 100% weapon damage and inflicting Disintegrate, which deals 5% weapon damage per second for 8 seconds, which, like your other skills, can stack up to 3 times. Once the orb passes through enemies and allies applying Disintegrate, it then comes back like a boomerang as a healing orb and heals friendlies for 20% of weapon damage for 5 seconds. The passives for this skill are Draining Orb, granting 5% of mana per enemy hit, Slowing Orb, slowing enemies who are afflicted by debuffs and reducing their movement speed by 30% for 3 seconds, and lastly, Detonating Orb, which makes this skill really fun. A player can press the skill button again, and depending on whether the damage orb or the heal orb is activated, the orb will explode to deal 100% of weapon damage, or explode to heal friendlies for 70% of weapon damage. This skill is great because with some practice timing, you can either up your DPS on enemies by detonating the skills for more damage and not even bothering with the heal orb coming back. Or if you're a healer, you can maximize your healing output by detonating the heal orb on allies, which still gives them the heal over time along with the extra 70% heal. Both of these detonations have pretty big AoE radiuses too, which is awesome. The last skill I'll go over today is Essence Rupture, which fires a projectile to inflict Essence Rupture for 10 seconds, healing anyone who hits the target for 20% of damage done, not including dots. The 2 passives for this are Invigorating Rupture, which allows players to receive 15 stamina when hitting the afflicted target, and Overflowing Essence, which makes it so friendlies within 4 meters of the afflicted area are healed for 80% of your weapon damage when the skill ends. This skill is great, especially in 1v1 scenarios or dungeon scenarios, as it allows your teammates to heal themselves while attacking a single target. The heal on the last passive will be especially great for anyone in melee range, as the AoE heal does pretty decent amount of healing when the skill ends. Definitely need to be mindful to use this skill when enemies aren't going to move out of it, as the initial hitbox is relatively small. Next, I'm going to quickly read over the available passives in each tree, starting with the Annihilation tree. The final passive for this tree is Void Caller, which, on successful ability hit, you gain a stack of Void Essence. At 6 stacks, you consume the stacks and gain an AoE aura that heals yourself and allies for 30% of weapon damage, and deals 30% of weapon damage per second to enemies inside. It has a 5-second duration and a 20-second cooldown. This passive is really awesome for self-sustain and a bit of group healing. Forsaken Pact deals 10% damage while below 50% mana. Keen Humility gives 10% critical chance when all abilities are on cooldown. Keen Confidence grants 10% critical chance while above 50% health. Refreshing Precision gives 10% cooldown reduction on all abilities on critical hit. Empowering Proximity gains Empower when casting abilities within 5 meters of an enemy, increasing damage by 10% for 5 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Efficient Harvest Essence health drain is reduced by 50% while below 25% mana. Leeching Agony on critical hit gain health equal to 15% of damage done. And lastly, Refreshing Frailty, which gives 5% cooldown reduction on all abilities when successfully hitting enemies afflicted by 3 or more debuff stacks, which can all be from different debuffs. On the Decay tree, we have the passives Deadly Range, which gives 10% damage on successful ranged heavy attacks against targets more than 8 meters away. Fervent Thirst gives 5% mana per successful ranged light attack against targets afflicted by your Void Gauntlet debuffs. Radiant Efficiency, mana costs are reduced by 25% while above 50% mana. Refreshing Harvest, cooldowns are reduced by 10% per second while performing Harvest Essence. Leeching Bolts, healing from ranged heavy attacks is increased by an additional 30% of damage dealt if the target is below 50% health. Extended Suffering, successful ranged heavy attacks increase the duration of non-crowd control debuffs you have applied by 10%. Mending Evasion, dodging with full mana heals you for 80% weapon damage, scaling with focus, and with a 20-second cooldown. And finally, Glimpse of the Void. You can gain a stack of Void Essence per successful ability hit. At 4 or more stacks, your next successful ranged heavy attack will instantly reset all Void Gauntlet cooldowns and remove all stacks, with a 15-second cooldown. Like the final passive in the Annihilation tree, this passive is pretty impressive, giving you the ability to reset your cooldowns instantly. And for the healers out there, so far on PTR, there have been some pretty significant lifestaff nerfs to nearly every healing skill with the addition of Void Gauntlet. While this is definitely reducing the overall healing of lifestaff, having an offhand that also has healing abilities definitely helps to make up for it. So don't worry, it doesn't feel too bad. I'll have a video talking about these nerfs coming out soon as I do some more testing. I hope you guys found this video helpful and that you're all as excited for Void Gauntlet as I am. So far, this weapon is looking pretty insane for both DPS and healers alike, and it's definitely a blast to use. Like and subscribe for more content, and I'll catch you all in your world.